ChatGPT said. Jonathan Reed sat alone in his glass office, the city lights beyond the window twinkling like distant stars. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and watched one lone car slip by on the wet street below. It was Christmas Eve, and the building around him was silent. He could hear only the hum of the heating vents and the faint echo of his own breathing. His desk lamp cast a circle of light over the scattered papers and empty coffee cups. Jonathan reached out and picked up a photo frame. It held a picture of him as a boy, smiling wide beside his grandmother, her arms wrapped around him in a warm embrace. He smiled at the memory, but it felt hollow now. He wiped a droplet of condensation from the glass and set the frame back down. Gently, he tapped a few keys on his laptop, opening an email from his sister Claire. It read, "Merry Christmas, Jonathan. We miss you tonight." He stared at the words and felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had not replied, had not joined them at the table for years. His work had always come first: meetings, conference calls, travel. That pursuit of success had given him a luxury penthouse and a corner office on the top floor, but it had cost him something he could never buy back. The office was warm, but his heart felt cold. He closed the email without answering and leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling tiles coated in fluorescent light. In that moment, he remembered another Christmas Eve, maybe 20 years ago, when he had been small enough to curl up in his grandmother's lap by the fireplace. The room smelled of pine and cinnamon. His grandfather played an old record of carols, and he had pressed his cheek against the spinning sleeve. He felt safe and full of wonder then. He had believed, as children do, that the world held only kindness. But over time, life had taught him that kindness could be sidelined by ambition. He rose through the ranks of his company, closing deal after deal. People called him driven, unstoppable. He wore their praise like a medal. Yet in quiet moments like this, he wondered if he had lost something more precious than any contract. His assistant Marisol knocked softly at the door and poked her head in. She wore a festive pin shaped like a candy cane. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, "the building will lock down in 10 minutes. Are you all right?" Jonathan rubbed his eyes and managed a small smile. "Thank you, Marisol. I'll be fine," he replied, his voice low. She nodded and slipped back into the hallway. He listened to her footsteps fade and then exhaled slowly. He gathered his coat and briefcase, as if preparing to leave, though leaving felt like stepping out of a bubble he had built around his life. He walked down the long corridor toward the lobby. The walls were lined with framed awards and photographs of company events, all frozen moments of celebration that once filled him with pride. Now, they felt like portraits of a stranger's life. He passed cubicles where the night janitor worked quietly, dusting keyboards and straightening papers. He caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the glass door and blinked. The man looking back had sharp features, a neatly trimmed beard, and tired eyes that betrayed the cost of sleepless nights. He opened the door to the lobby and paused, letting the cool air brush his face. He pulled his coat tighter and stepped into the wide space. The lobby was decorated with garlands and a tall Christmas tree, its lights glowing softly in the dimness. A few employees gathered near the reception desk, laughing and sharing stories. Jonathan hesitated at the edge of their circle, thought of turning away, of slipping unnoticed into the night. But something in him stayed his step. Perhaps it was the sight of a little girl, her cheeks flushed from the cold, clutching a paper plate of cookies. She wore a red coat that barely reached her knees, and wool mittens that slipped down to her wrists. She looked around, her eyes bright and curious. Jonathan caught her gaze as he crossed the lobby. She smiled and stepped forward, her small shoes shuffling on the marble floor. He slowed and bent slightly to meet her height. "Merry Christmas," she said, offering him the plate. Jonathan's heart thudded. "Thank you," he replied, unsure what to do. The girl tilted her head. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" she asked, in a voice clear and gentle. He blinked. "Dinner?" "With them." He looked past her at a couple standing behind, their tired smiles warm with invitation. Sarah and David, he would later learn, waited patiently. Jonathan took a breath and felt a trace of something unfamiliar: hope. He followed them out the side door into the quiet evening. The wind was sharp, but he did not feel it. Felt drawn into something new. They walked a few blocks to a small cafe that stayed open for last-minute holiday visitors. The lights inside were golden and welcoming. They settled into a corner. Table draped with a simple red cloth. The aroma of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce filled the air. For the first time in years, Jonathan did not check his watch or glance at his phone. He simply sat and watched the family share stories. The little girl, Emily, chattered about her favorite Christmas book, its pages full of talking animals and snowy forests. Her parents laughed as she made funny voices for each character. They passed around sandwiches and mugs of hot cocoa. Jonathan took a sip and felt warmth spread through him. He realized he had forgotten how sweet cocoa could be. Sarah offered him one of her sandwiches. He hesitated, then took a bite. It tasted like kindness and simple generosity, flavors he had long ignored. He looked at Emily, who gave him a thumbs up, and he smiled back, his shoulders loosening for the first time that night. As they talked, Jonathan shared a small memory. From his childhood, how each year his grandmother let him lick the spoon after stirring the pudding. He described how rich and creamy it tasted, how it made him feel special. He noticed the family listening, their eyes showing understanding. He thought of his grandmother and felt a pang of regret that he had not visited her this year. He realized that even someone like him, a CEO with power and wealth, could feel lost without real human connection. It was a moment of clarity, shining through the holiday lights and laughter. After a while, the cafe clock chimed midnight. Emily looked at Jonathan and grinned. "Merry Christmas," she said again, squeezing his hand. He felt a lump in his throat as he stood to go. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent. Watched the flakes drift down and land on his coat? He looked at the family beside him and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the cafe's lights. He thanked them, promising to remember this night forever. As he walked back to his car, he held Emily's old cookie plate in his coat pocket. It was empty, but it felt full of hope. That Christmas Eve, Jonathan Reed returned to his penthouse, not with a deal closed or a project completed, but with a promise to himself to make room for people in his life again. He hung his coat and left the cookie plate on his kitchen counter. A simple reminder of a little girl's invitation. He opened his phone and typed a message to his sister. "I'm sorry I missed dinner. Can I make it up to you?" He sent it without hesitation. He felt something gentle blooming in his chest, a sense that success meant more than power or wealth. It meant sharing moments, laughter, and meals with those we love. And on that cold night, in the glow of Christmas lights, he had found a warmth that would guide him forward. Jonathan woke on the morning of December 26th with light spilling through the curtains. He reached for his phone and saw the message from his sister, Claire. "Yes, we'd love to see you tonight. Love, Claire." A small thrill ran through him. He sat up and took a deep breath, feeling the memory of Emily's words. Family means people who care, still warm in his mind. For so long he had measured time in meetings and flights, but now he understood there was a different clock, one set by laughter and shared moments. He got dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, clothes he seldom chose for public outings. In the kitchen, he found the paper plate Emily had used. He washed it carefully, then set it on a shelf where he could see it every day. Its chipped edge seemed a small treasure, a sign that kindness need not be perfect to be real. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring into the dark liquid as if it might speak to him. It tasted bitter, but he welcomed the sharpness. It reminded him he was awake to something new. At work, Jonathan arrived early, a rare choice. He passed through the lobby, where the decorations had been taken down, leaving the space sterile again. He stopped at the reception desk and left a note for Marisol. "Thank you for your Christmas wish. Let's close the office at 4 p.m. today. Join me in the cafeteria for hot cocoa." He walked away, surprised at how his heart beat faster at the thought of gathering people simply to share a drink. His colleagues would find it odd. This was not how Jonathan Reed had run things before, but that was the point. He wanted odd, unexpected, human. He spent the morning in meetings, but something had shifted. He listened more. When an employee spoke up with an idea, he paused his own train of thought and asked questions. He even smiled, something he rarely did in boardrooms. At noon, he skipped a working lunch and instead took a walk to the park across the street. The air was cold and crisp. Snow still lay in patches under the trees. He watched two children build a small snowman, their cheeks bright and their laughter echoing. He thought of Emily, her face full of hope. He realized hope was contagious. Back at his desk, he drafted an email to his grandmother. He wrote, "Dear Grandma, I would love to visit you this Sunday. Can I bring you lunch? I want to hear your stories again." He hesitated before hitting send, imagining her surprise. Then he pressed the button. His throat felt tight, but in a good way, as if he had unlocked something he had kept closed too long. The day passed in a blur of work that suddenly seemed less urgent. At 3:30, Jonathan closed his laptop and stood. He walked through the hallways, greeting secretaries and assistants, people he usually passed without a second thought. Some looked startled, others smiled broadly. When he reached the cafeteria, he found it empty, except for tables and a hot cocoa machine someone had brought in for the holiday. He plugged it in and watched the machine hum to life. The rich scent of chocolate powder and steam filled the room. He poured a cup, stirred in whipped cream, and carried it to the center table. At 4 p.m. sharp, a small group appeared, some managers, a few interns, Marisol. They clustered around the table, exchanging curious glances. Jonathan held up his mug. "A merry day after Christmas," he said simply. The words felt awkward on his lips, but they carried warmth. Marisol raised her cup. "At 2 unexpected gatherings," she replied, laughed, and then he poured cocoa for everyone. As they sipped, he asked each person about their holiday, where they had been, what traditions they loved. They told stories of home-cooked meals, of relatives singing off-key, of small gifts that meant the world. For an hour, the office felt like a home. When the last cup was empty, Jonathan looked around and realized he had created something he never thought he would, a moment of community. He felt proud, not of a quarterly report or a profit margin, but of bringing people together. He cleaned the cups, refusing offers to let the staff handle it. It was his gift to the man to himself. That evening, he arrived at his grandmother's house first. She opened the door in a flowery apron, her white hair pulled back in a bun. She gasped when she saw him. "Jonathan," she cried, wrapping him in a hug so tight he felt tears sting his eyes. Inside, the house smelled of chicken stew and fresh bread. The walls were lined with old photographs, black and white images of a younger Jonathan and his brother, their arms flung wide in laughter. Everything felt the same and yet different. It was comforting. He set the container of mashed potatoes and green beans on the stove. Grandma beamed. "You remembered?" she said softly. He nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I missed you," he whispered. They settled at the table, and she ladled stew into their bowls. He ate slowly, savoring each flavor. He told her about Emily, about the stranger's dinner, about the cocoa in the office. She listened with bright eyes, occasionally nodding. When he finished, she reached across and held his hand. "My boy," she said, "don't let the world tell you otherwise." He spent the rest of the evening talking about his work, his travels, his regrets. Grandma shared stories of her own of war years, of love found in unlikely places, of the time she sold homemade jams at the market when money was tight. Each memory seemed to weave them closer. When they finally rose from the table, Jonathan helped her wash the dishes. He scrubbed the pots and pans as if he were washing away old mistakes. Grandma hummed a carol under her breath while he rinsed. Before he left, he stood in the living room by the tree. He saw the drawing Emily had made, the 3 stick figures. Around a table tacked to the wall, Grandma pointed to it. "That child," she said, "has wisdom beyond her years." He nodded, thinking how a small act of kindness had changed his life. He hugged his grandmother again, promising to return soon. On his way home, Jonathan thought about Claire. He still had to see her the next day. He felt both nervous and excited. He realized he had not seen his sister's face in years. Not really. He knew the conversation might be awkward, but he felt ready. For the first time in a long time, he cared more about connection than perception. He wanted to show her he had changed. At home, he placed the paper plate back on its shelf and stood for a moment looking at the cocoa stain that had dried on it. It was a small imperfection he would never clean away. It reminded him that real life was messy and beautiful. He opened his laptop and drafted another message to Claire. "I would like to spend New Year's with you. Can we make plans?" He hesitated, then sent it. He closed the laptop and sat in silence. The room was empty, but he felt full of something. Stronger than solitude-hope. As he turned out the light, he thought of Emily's question. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" He smiled in the dark. He was no longer just a lonely CEO. He was someone who knew how to say yes. He knew that life's true gifts came wrapped in simple moments, a shared meal, a warm hug, a child's pure heart. He drifted to sleep, imagining the New Year's celebration with Claire, the laughter, and the stories yet to be told. And he knew that whatever the future held, he would face it at a table surrounded by people who cared. ChatGPT said, Jonathan woke early on New Year's Eve. He felt a flutter of nerves in his chest as he dressed in a dark sweater and jeans. He strove for comfort over style, wanting to feel at ease when he saw Claire again. He thought of their childhood, how they used to bake cookies together. Flour dusting the kitchen counter, laughter rising like steam from hot cocoa. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. Today would be a new start. He left his penthouse and walked down the quiet street to Claire's house. The winter air bit at his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His mind spun with questions. Would she forgive him for all the years he missed? Would she still be angry? He found himself stepping lightly, as if afraid the ground might crack beneath him. Claire opened the door before he knocked. She wore a wool coat and a scarf wrapped tight around her neck. For a moment, they stood staring at each other. She looked older than he remembered, lines near her eyes. Silver threads in her hair, but her smile, when it came, shone with the same warmth. He had known as a child. "John," she said, her voice soft. He could hear her surprise and relief. He nodded and stepped forward. "Claire," he said, sounding small. She hugged him gently. He felt her shoulders shake as if she had held in tears. He held her back. Careful, trying not to break the moment, she led him inside. The living room was cozy, with string lights on the mantel and family photos on the wall. He spotted a picture of them as kids, Claire with pigtails, John with a wide grin and chocolate smeared on his cheek. He remembered that day. They had chased each other around the backyard, shrieking with laughter. How simple life had been then. Claire put a kettle on the stove and filled 2 mugs with tea. They sat on the sofa, knees almost touching. He watched her stir in honey and wondered how to begin. Words came slow. Finally he said, "I'm sorry, Claire. I was wrong to stay away." His voice cracked a little. He looked down at his shoes, the laces neatly tied but dusty. She watched him for a moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand. "I missed you," she said. "I miss my brother." He felt a rush of relief, like the first warm day. After a long winter, he lifted his gaze to meet her eyes. They were bright but gentle. He nodded, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. They talked while the tea cooled. He told her about Emily and her family's invitation. She listened, smiling as he described the little girl's courage and kindness. Claire smiled wider at the story's end. "It sounds like magic," she said. He nodded. "It felt magical," he replied. "It reminded me what I lost." Claire glanced at the clock. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. To the kitchen, where the table was set with dishes of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. Candles flickered in the center. Scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air. He took a seat at the head of the table, a place he had not claimed in years. Their mother emerged, looking smaller now with age, but still radiant. She wrapped her arms around both of them, pulling them together in a hug that felt like home. "My boys together at last," she whispered. He closed his eyes and leaned into her warmth. He had forgotten how much he needed this. They served themselves and began to eat. The first bite of chicken tasted like forgiveness, juicy, tender, honest. They spoke of small things: Claire's job at the local school, their mother's knitting. Group, neighborhood news. He laughed at Claire's jokes, and she nudged him when he forgot a story's punchline. Their conversation flowed like a river, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, but always moving forward. Pie with vanilla ice cream. Claire looked at him with soft eyes. "Tell me more about your work," she said. He told her the name of his company and what it did, then realized how hollow the words felt. He spoke of meetings and budgets, but he paused when he saw his mother and sister exchange polite smiles. He took a deep breath. "I want to cut back," he said quietly. "I want time to be here with you, with Mom, with people I care about." The table went quiet. He braced for disappointment or doubt. Instead, Claire's eyes shone with pride. "That's wonderful, John," she said. "We want you here." His mother reached across and patted his hand. "There's always room," she said. The rest of the evening passed in gentle warmth. They told stories of holidays past, of snowball fights that ended in truce, of a Christmas when the power went out and they played charades by candlelight, of summer nights catching fireflies in jars. Each tale felt like a thread weaving them back together. Later, they moved to the living room. Claire fetched a board game, an old favorite they played as kids. They set it on the coffee table and laughed as they worked the pieces. He remembered how much fun games could be, not about winning, but about sharing time. When Claire won the last round, he congratulated her with a bow. She giggled and wrapped him on the arm with a pillow. At midnight, they stepped outside onto the porch. The air sparkled with frost. They counted down the New Year's bells from the neighborhood church. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Claire and their mother hugged him again, and for the first time in a long time, he felt fully alive. He stayed another hour, helping clear dishes and wash glasses. He carried trays to the kitchen, setting cups on the counter with care. He washed a pan that had Grandma's hands on it too, imagining her humming as she cooked alongside him. His sister and mother chatted about their plans for the next week, and he listened, content to be a part of their world. When he finally drove home, he felt a quiet happiness settling in his chest. He placed the drawing Emily had made on the dashboard so he would see it on the way. He thought about his promise to himself to make space for people, to say yes to invitations, to cherish moments. He realized that these choices did not weaken him. They made him stronger. Over the next days, he began to shift his routine. Left the office on time or early, surprising his team but greeting it with a smile. He called his grandmother on random afternoons just to chat, made weekend plans with friends he had neglected. He even volunteered at a local shelter, serving meals on Saturdays and talking to people who had little but shared what they had with gratitude. At work, his style changed too. He listened more, delegated tasks, and encouraged others to lead projects. He found that stepping back made the whole team stronger and happier. He still cared about success, but he no longer measured it only by numbers. He measured it by laughter in the office, by the trust in his team's voices, by the invitations he received from friends. One Monday morning, Marisol found him in the lobby, greeting employees with a warm good morning. She paused. In surprise, "John, you're here so early again," she said. He laughed. "I want to start my day differently," he replied. "I want to be part of the team," she smiled, her eyes shining. "You're going to love that," she said. As the days passed, Emily's plate remained on his shelf, a constant reminder of how a small act of kindness can change a life. He thought of the little girl often, and one afternoon, he sent a letter to her family, thanking them again for inviting him, enclosed a gift card to the cafe where they had dined. He hoped they would go back often, and maybe think of him. With a smile, spring arrived, bringing blossoms and light breezes. Jonathan organized a company picnic in the park. He invited families, friends, and employees. He watched children chase each other under the trees and parents laughing as they set blankets on the grass. He joined in, playing frisbee and sharing sandwiches. He felt alive in a way boardrooms never gave him. That evening, when the picnic ended, he stood by the plate of food left on the buffet table. He picked up a single paper plate, the same style as Emily's, and placed it on his own shelf at home. It was a symbol of how far he had come from a lonely CEO to a man surrounded by laughter and love. He carried the warmth of that New Year's Eve with him always. He never forgot that simple question, "Do you want to have dinner with us?" How it opened his heart. He learned that true success included people. And in every meal he shared, every hug he gave, every story he heard, he found joy deeper than any contract or achievement. He lived not for the next deal, but for the next moment of connection, always ready to say yes. Jonathan woke one morning to the sound of his phone buzzing. He stretched and reached for it, smiling when he saw a message from Emily's mother. "Sarah, we're in town next week for a school event. Would you like to join us for lunch?" He tapped his reply without hesitation. "Yes, I'd love to." Then he paused, heart fluttering. He realized how different his life had become. A simple invitation no longer felt like a burden, but like a gift. Over the next few days, Jonathan cleared his calendar for the lunch. He felt a flutter of nerves as the date approached. He thought of Emily's bright smile and her question that first night. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" He remembered. How her kindness had broken through his walls. He felt the chance to repay that kindness. The day arrived. The office seemed to buzz with extra energy. He greeted employees cheerfully and reminded them that he would be away for a couple of hours. When lunchtime came, he left the building and stepped into the chilly air. Walked the few blocks to the community center where Emily's school held events. Inside, the paint was bright, and children's artwork covered the walls. Jonathan felt a warm glow in his chest, as if he were stepping into a friend's home. He found Sarah and David near the refreshment table. Emily ran toward him, her coat flapping behind her. She jumped up and hugged his leg. "You came," she said, her eyes shining. He knelt and hugged her back. "Of course," he replied. She led him through a hallway to a small lunchroom where tables were set with sandwiches, fruit, and juice boxes. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, as if waiting for an audience. They sat together at a table near the window. Emily chatted about her art project, painted birdhouse she would give to her teacher. Sarah smiled proudly as David passed Jonathan a turkey sandwich. They all ate, sharing simple food that tasted like friendship. Emily handed him one of her drawings, a picture of Jonathan, Emily, Sarah, and David standing under a tree. Jonathan placed it carefully in his jacket pocket, a treasure he would carry with him. After lunch, Emily's teachers invited Jonathan to speak to a small group of students about his career. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking still made him nervous, but then he thought of his own path. He remembered how ambition had pushed him forward, but how kindness had guided him back to himself. He stood before the children and told them a brief story, how he had missed family dinners while chasing work, how a little girl's invitation had changed his life, and how important it was to share kindness whenever you could. The children listened with wide eyes and quiet respect. When he finished, they clapped, and one student asked, "Can I invite you to our class party?" He laughed and said, "I'd love to." He left the room feeling warm, as if he had given something back. That evening, back in his penthouse, he unwrapped a bottle of wine and poured himself a glass. He looked across the city lights and thought about the changes he had made. He remembered the office cocoa, the family dinners, the school lunch. Thought of Emily's family and how he wanted to help them. He picked up his phone and searched for the community center's donation page. He made a gift that would help fund art supplies for the students. Typed a message. "Thank you for teaching me how important small acts of kindness can be." Then he sent it. The next morning, a note arrived at his office, a thank you card from Sarah and David. On the front was a drawing of the family under a tree, surrounded by hearts. Inside, Emily had written in her careful handwriting, "Thank you for lunch and your story. You are my hero." He pinned the card to his office wall next to Emily's first drawing. He smiled every time he saw it. But life, as it often does, brought new challenges. One Monday, Jonathan learned that his company faced a tough decision. A factory in another state needed an upgrade to comply with safety rules. The cost would be high, and investors were pushing for a quick sale instead of the expensive renovation. If he sold the factory, jobs would vanish and families would struggle. But if he spent the money, company profits would dip and stock prices might fall. He sat in the conference room, the board members' faces serious. His old self would have cut and run, prioritizing the bottom line. But his new self hesitated. He remembered Grandma's words, "A kind heart never regrets helping others." He thought of the factory workers, their families, their small towns. He thought of Emily's school and the art supplies he had helped fund. He felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond profits. He spoke slowly, measuring his words. "We cannot abandon people," he said. "We built this company together, and we must stand by our values." Some on the board nodded, others frowned. They asked tough questions about risks and margins. Jonathan listened, then proposed a plan. Invest in the factory upgrade in phases, spreading the cost over 2 years, while securing new clients through a marketing campaign focused on the company's commitment to safety and community. It would be tight, but it showed that the company cared about its people. He ended with this: "We succeed when everyone succeeds. That is how we will grow stronger together." The room fell silent. Then one board member, the oldest on the panel, said quietly, "I respect that vision." Others murmured agreement. By the end of the meeting, they voted to approve Jonathan's phased upgrade plan. Relief and pride washed over him. He realized that leadership was not just about numbers on a sheet, but about caring for people's lives. Over the next weeks, he visited the factory. He walked the production floors in his safety gear, greeted workers by name, and listened to their concerns. He brought cocoa and snacks one afternoon, reminding himself of that first cocoa in the office. The workers laughed when he fumbled with the coffee machine, spilling chocolate powder on his coat. He cleaned it up, joking that cocoa was sticking. With him, they appreciated his genuine interest more than any speech. He saw their gratitude in their eyes and felt a deep satisfaction. Meanwhile, Emily's art project continued. Sarah invited him to the school's spring art fair. He went and saw Emily standing proudly by her birdhouse painting. The project was part of a contest, and Emily explained every detail as if it were a masterwork. He congratulated her and praised her creativity. She beamed and said, "I'm going to be an artist, and I want to paint happy things." He told her he believed she would and that he would always be her friend. He left the fair carrying a small painted flower pot she had given him, placed it on his desk, where a small plant now grew. The seasons changed. Summer brought long days and warm nights. Jonathan took vacations for the first time in years. He went camping with Claire and their mother, sleeping under the stars and telling ghost stories by the campfire. He taught his nephew to fish and promised to return every year. He felt alive, connected, and free from the chains of his former routine. One day, while relaxing at home, he received an invitation from the community center. They asked him to join their board of advisors. He thought back to how he had once stepped into the center as a guest, shy and unsure. Now they wanted him to guide them. He accepted. At his first meeting, he offered ideas to support after-school programs, art therapy for seniors, and job fairs for local youth. He spoke calmly, valuing each suggestion. At the meeting's close, the center director thanked him. "You make a difference," she said. He realized how far he had come from a lonely CEO to a community leader. That night, he sat on his balcony. Sipping tea, he gazed at the city's lights and thought of the many small moments that had changed his life. A girl's invitation, a family's dinner, a boardroom decision guided by compassion. He unlocked his phone and began typing a letter for a leadership magazine. He wrote about how success could be redefined by kindness, about how companies thrive when they care. He hoped other leaders would read and learn from his journey. Before he slept, he placed Emily's card and her painting on his bedside table. He whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for guiding him toward a richer life. He felt ready for whatever came next and certain that he would meet it with an open heart. And as he drifted off, he imagined a world where every leader remembered a little girl's question and chose kindness over cold profit, choosing people over numbers. That, he thought, would be the greatest success of all. Jonathan sat at his desk one morning, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. He took a deep breath and felt a calm excitement inside him. It had been months since that first dinner with Emily's family, and his life had changed in many small but powerful ways. He no longer raced through each day with a constant rush. He paused to notice the moments that truly mattered. He looked at the stack of invitations on his desks, some from community events, others from friends, and he felt a warm glow, knowing he would accept each one. Making room in his schedule for connection, that afternoon he left the office early and walked to the community center where he served as an advisor. The hallways were bright with children's artwork and posters for upcoming classes. He greeted the receptionist by name and waved at a group of teenagers practicing dance moves in a side room. Felt at home here. Past the art studio, where a sign read "Spring Show, all welcome." Remembered the first time he had come, nervous and unsure. Now he walked through these halls with confidence and purpose. In the main room, a small gathering had formed. Sarah and David stood with Emily between them. Emily waved and ran to him, her laughter filling the air. She pressed a folded paper into his hand. "It's a thank you gift," she said. He opened it and saw a drawing of him standing under a bright yellow sun, surrounded by people holding hands. He smiled and hugged her. "Thank you, Emily," he said. Her family invited him to sit and share coffee and snacks. They chatted about the center's new spring programs and upcoming fundraisers. He offered suggestions and ideas, listening. As they spoke, he felt proud to be part of something bigger than himself. Later, Jonathan returned to his office, where Marisol greeted him. He told her about the center's spring show and asked if she would join him. She smiled broadly. "Love to," she said. He handed her a ticket. "It's next Friday," he said. "Let's go together." She nodded, her eyes bright. He realized how important it was to include those around him in these moments. Sharing kindness with others multiplied its power. That evening, Jonathan sat with his grandmother at her kitchen table. She stirred a pot of soup, humming softly. He helped chop vegetables, and they worked side by side. She told him stories of her youth, of simple joys and hard times. He listened, asking questions and laughing at her memories. When the soup was done, they ate at the little table by the window. He looked out at the dark sky dotted with stars. "Thank you for everything," he said. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "You have grown into a fine man," she replied. He smiled, feeling the bond between them deepened. On Friday night, Jonathan and Marisol arrived at the community center's spring art show. The room was filled with tables displaying paintings, sculptures, and photographs. Families crowded the space, pointing out their children's work with pride. Music played softly in the background. Jonathan saw Emily standing by her painting, now framed and hung on the wall. He took Marisol by the arm and led her there. "This is incredible," he said. Emily beamed and gave him a quick hug before rushing off to join her parents. He turned to Marisol. "Isn't it wonderful?" She nodded, her eyes shining. They walked through the exhibit, admiring each piece and congratulating young artists. At the end of the evening, a small stage stood at the front of the room. The center's director stepped up to thank volunteers and supporters. She spoke of Jonathan's contributions, of his warm heart and steady guidance. She invited him to say a few words. He stood and approached the microphone, his heart steady. He looked at the crowd, children, families, staff members, and friends. He thought of the lonely CEO he once was and felt gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. He cleared his throat and spoke in simple, honest words. He thanked everyone for welcoming him, for sharing their stories, and for teaching him what true success meant. He told them how a little girl's question, "Do you want to have dinner with us?" had changed his life forever. He urged them to reach out to someone new, to share a meal or a smile, and to build connections wherever they could. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. He stepped down, feeling a warmth that no boardroom victory could match. Weeks turned into months. Jonathan's life settled into a pattern of balance. He still led his company with skill, but he did so with empathy and care. He hired a new vice president to manage day-to-day operations, giving himself more time for community work and his family. He attended school events, supported charity drives, and organized company volunteer days. He celebrated holidays with relatives and friends, always making sure to pass along an invitation to those who might feel alone. One crisp autumn day, invited his entire company to a park for a gratitude picnic. He set up tables with blankets, baskets of food, and handmade cards. Employees wrote notes of thanks to one another, sharing stories of help and support. Families joined, and children ran through the open fields, their laughter echoing in the cool air. Jonathan walked among the groups, hugging colleagues and chatting with their children. He placed a small drawing of stick figures around a table, Millie's first gift on a stand by the food table. It reminded everyone of how a single act of kindness can grow into something wonderful. That evening, as he walked home under an orange sky, he thought about the journey he had taken. He remembered the cold office on Christmas Eve, the lonely feeling that once defined his life. He recalled the warmth of Emily's family, the glow of hot cocoa shared with coworkers, the forgiveness of his sister and grandmother. He felt grateful for each moment that had guided him back to himself. At home, he sat by his window and opened a notebook, began to write down the story of his transformation, beginning with that simple question. He wrote about the power of invitation, the importance of listening, and the joy of shared moments. He drafted chapters about family, community, work, and giving. He knew that his story might help others see the beauty of kindness. He planned to send the manuscript to a publisher, hoping to reach a wider audience. Before he went to bed, he placed the notebook on his bedside table next to Emily's cards and drawings. He whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for leading him to a life filled with connection. He closed his eyes, content and hopeful. Over time, he published his book, and it touched many hearts. Leaders in other companies reached out to him for advice. Schools invited him to speak about kindness in business. Community centers asked him to help start similar programs in other towns. He traveled sometimes, but he always returned to the city where his journey began. Each year on Christmas Eve, he left his office in time to join a family meal. He invited friends, employees, and neighbors, anyone who might be alone. They gathered under a tree, shared food, and told stories. He sometimes saw Emily there, now a little older, her eyes bright with the same kindness. She watched him with pride, knowing that her question had changed a man's life. And so, Jonathan lived each day guided by a simple rule. When someone offers you kindness, accept it and then pass it on. He never forgot the lonely CEO who sat by the window and dreamed of something more. He honored that man by choosing connection over ambition, people over profit, and warmth over isolation. At every meal shared, every story spoken, and every hand held, he found a success greater than any deal of life, rich with love, joy, and belonging.